Subscribe now and press the bell icon so you never miss an emotional story that touches your heart. The morning sun cast golden rays across the palace grounds as Marcus stood at his post near the main entrance. His red uniform was perfectly pressed, his white gloves spotless, and his tall black hat sat firmly on his head. He had been a royal guard for 3 years now, and every day he felt the same sense of pride and responsibility. The palace was a magnificent building with tall stone walls, beautiful gardens, and hundreds of rooms where the royal family lived and worked. Marcus was 25 years old, tall and strong, with kind brown eyes that often smiled even when his face remained serious. Being a royal guard was not just a job for him. It was an honor, a dream he had worked toward since he was a young boy. He remembered watching the guards on television during royal ceremonies, standing so still and proud, and thinking that one day he wanted to be just like them. But Marcus had not always been on this path. When he was younger, he was a troubled child who struggled in school. His family did not have much money, and he often felt lost and angry about his situation. He got into fights, skipped classes, and nearly gave up on his education completely. His parents were worried sick about him, not knowing how to help their son find his way. Everything changed when Marcus was 13 years old. A new teacher arrived at his school, a woman named Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. She was in her 40s. With gray hair tied back in a simple bun and glasses that always seemed to slide down her nose, Mrs. Thompson taught English and history. But more than that, she taught her students about life, respect, and believing in themselves. Mrs. Thompson saw something in Marcus that others had missed. While other teachers had given up on him, calling him a troublemaker and a lost cause, she refused to let him fail. She would stay after school to help him with his homework, even when he was rude and ungrateful. She never raised her voice at him, never made him feel small or stupid, even when he deserved it. Marcus remembered one particular afternoon when he had gotten into another fight at school. He was sitting outside the principal's office, expecting to be expelled, when Mrs. Thompson sat down beside him. She did not lecture him or scold him. Instead, she asked him a simple question that changed everything. She said to him in a gentle voice that he would never forget those words. She asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, what his dreams were, and whether this was the person he truly wanted to become. Marcus had never thought about it before. No one had ever asked him about his dreams or made him feel like he had a future worth planning for. That day, something shifted inside Marcus. He started to try harder in school. He stopped getting into fights and began to think about what kind of man he wanted to be. Mrs. Thompson continued to support him every step of the way. She helped him improve his grades, encouraged him to join the school's discipline committee, and even wrote him letters of recommendation when he applied to the Royal Guard Academy. When Marcus finally received his acceptance letter to the academy, the first person he wanted to tell was Mrs. Thompson. He ran to her classroom after school, waving the letter in the air with tears in his eyes. She hugged him tightly and told him how proud she was of him. She said she always knew he had greatness inside him, and that she was honored to have been part of his journey. After Marcus graduated from the academy and became a royal guard, he tried to stay in touch with Mrs. Thompson. He would visit her occasionally, always in his civilian clothes, to thank her and update her on his life. She would make tea, and they would sit in her small living room talking about everything and nothing. Those visits meant the world to Marcus because Mrs. Thompson had become more than just a teacher to him. She was like a second mother, someone who believed in him when no one else did. But over the past year, Marcus had been so busy with his duties at the palace that he had not been able to visit Mrs. Thompson. He thought about her often and made mental notes to call her or stop by. But time kept slipping away. Royal guards worked long hours, and the responsibilities were demanding. There were ceremonies to attend, visitors to protect, and endless training sessions to maintain their skills. On this particular morning, as Marcus stood at his post, he noticed an unusual commotion near the palace gates. A group of elderly visitors was arriving for a special tour that the palace offered once a month to retired teachers. It was the Queen's personal initiative to honor educators who had dedicated their lives to teaching. The program allowed retired teachers from across the country to visit the palace, meet some members of the royal household, and enjoy a formal tea ceremony. Marcus watched as the group of about 30 teachers slowly made their way through security. They looked excited and nervous, chatting among themselves and taking photographs of everything they saw. The tour guides were explaining the history of various parts of the palace as they walked. Marcus smiled slightly under his formal expression, thinking about how Mrs. Thompson would have loved something like this. She had always been passionate about history, would have asked a million questions. As the group came closer to where Marcus was stationed, he maintained his rigid posture and forward gaze, as required by Royal Guard protocol. Guards were trained to remain absolutely still and focused, never breaking character or showing emotion while on duty. They were like living statues, symbols of the palace's strength and discipline. Marcus had perfected this skill over the years, able to stand motionless for hours, regardless of weather, noise, or distraction. But as the group of teachers passed directly in front of him, something caught his attention. Among the elderly faces, there was one he recognized instantly. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, he almost broke protocol. Walking slowly with the group, wearing a simple blue dress and her familiar glasses, was Mrs. Eleanor Thompson. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat as he saw Mrs. Thompson walking with the group of retired teachers. She looked older than he remembered, moving more slowly and leaning slightly on a wooden cane. Her hair was completely white now, and there were more lines on her face, but her eyes still had that same gentle sparkle that had comforted him so many years ago. Every instinct in Marcus wanted to call out to her, to break from his position and run over to give her a hug. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, and how sorry he was for not visiting in so long. But he could not move. Royal Guards were held to the strictest standards of discipline and behavior. Breaking protocol while on duty was a serious offense that could result in punishment or even dismissal from the service. He had worked too hard to get where he was to throw it all away. Even for someone as important to him as Mrs. Thompson. As the group walked past, Marcus kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, but he strained to hear Mrs. Thompson's voice. She was talking quietly to another teacher beside her, commenting on the beautiful architecture of the palace. Her voice was the same, warm and kind, with that slight raspy quality from years of teaching and speaking. Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him, a mixture of joy at seeing her and sadness that he could not acknowledge her presence. Mrs. Thompson did not seem to notice Marcus standing at his post. Why would she? Royal Guards all looked similar in their formal uniforms, with their faces partially hidden beneath their tall hats. She probably walked right past him without any idea that her former student, the troubled boy she had saved all those years ago, was standing just feet away from her. The group continued their tour, moving deeper into the palace grounds. Marcus remained at his post, his mind racing with thoughts. He calculated his shift schedule in his head. He would be on duty for another 4 hours before his break. By then, the teacher's tour would likely be finished, and Mrs. Thompson would be gone. He might never get another chance to see her, to thank her properly for everything she had done for him. The morning dragged on slowly. Marcus performed his duties mechanically, his thoughts constantly drifting back to Mrs. Thompson. He wondered why she had come on this tour. Had she always wanted to visit the palace? Was she in good health? Did she ever think about him and wonder how he was doing? The questions spun through his mind endlessly. When Marcus's shift finally ended and another guard replaced him at his post, he quickly made his way to the palace administration office. He needed to find out if the retired teachers were still on the grounds. A friendly staff member told him that the tour group was currently having tea in the East Garden reception hall, and they would be departing in about an hour. Marcus rushed to his quarters, changed out of his formal uniform into his regular clothes. He wanted to catch Mrs. Thompson before she left, to have even just a few minutes to talk with her. As he hurried through the palace corridors, he thought about what he would say to her. How could he possibly express in words what she meant to him? How could he thank someone for literally changing the entire course of his life? When Marcus reached the East Garden reception hall, he paused at the entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see the group of teachers sitting at elegantly decorated tables, enjoying tea and small sandwiches. Palace staff moved gracefully between the tables, serving and chatting with the guests. The room was filled with the gentle sound of conversation and laughter. It was a beautiful scene, and Marcus felt a moment of hesitation about interrupting. He scanned the room until he spotted Mrs. Thompson sitting at a table near the window. She was talking animatedly with two other teachers, gesturing with her hands as she told some story. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the passion and life in her expression. This was the Mrs. Thompson he remembered, the teacher who could make any lesson interesting and who genuinely cared about connecting with people. Marcus took a deep breath and walked into the reception hall. As he approached Mrs. Thompson's table, his heart pounded in his chest. What if she did not remember him? It had been several years since they had last seen each other. He had changed a lot since then, becoming taller and more muscular from his guard training. His face had matured, and he now had a short beard that he had not had before. But as Marcus got closer, Mrs. Thompson glanced up, and her eyes met his. For a moment, there was no recognition, just polite curiosity about this young man approaching her table. Then, suddenly her eyes widened, and her hand flew to her mouth. She stood up so quickly that she nearly knocked over her teacup, and tears immediately began streaming down her face. Mrs. Thompson said his name in a trembling voice, as if she could not believe what she was seeing. Marcus nodded, his own eyes now filling with tears. Without another word, Mrs. Thompson rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. Marcus hugged her back, not caring that everyone in the room had stopped what they were doing to watch this unexpected reunion. They stood there for what felt like a long time, just holding each other. Mrs. Thompson was crying and laughing at the same time, patting Marcus's back and shoulders as if to make sure he was real. When they finally pulled apart, she held his face in her hands and looked at him with such love and pride that Marcus felt his heart might burst. Mrs. Thompson asked him what he was doing at the palace. Still not quite understanding, Marcus smiled through his tears and told her that he worked here. He explained that he was a royal guard, that he had been stationed at the front entrance that very morning when her tour group arrived. Mrs. Thompson's eyes grew even wider with shock and amazement. She grabbed his hands and squeezed them tightly, telling him that she could not believe it, that she was so incredibly proud of him. The other teachers at the table were watching with curiosity and emotion. One of them asked Mrs. Thompson who this young man was, and she turned to them with the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen on her face. She introduced him as her former student, the one she had told them about many times, the boy who had overcome so much and achieved his dreams. She spoke about Marcus with such pride and affection that he felt embarrassed, but also deeply moved. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down next to Mrs. Thompson at the table. The other teachers welcomed him warmly, and soon they were all talking together like old friends. Mrs. Thompson could not stop looking at Marcus, reaching out every few moments to touch his arm, as if to reassure herself that he was really there. She asked him a million questions about his life, his work, and how he had ended up as a royal guard. Marcus told her everything. He explained how after graduating from the academy, he had applied to several security positions, but had dreamed of becoming a royal guard. He described the rigorous testing process, the months of specialized training, and finally receiving the news that he had been selected. He talked about his daily responsibilities, the ceremonies he participated in, and the incredible honor he felt every time he put on his uniform. Mrs. Thompson listened to every word with complete attention, her eyes shining with tears of joy. She kept shaking her head in amazement, saying that she always knew he would do great things, but that this exceeded even her highest hopes for him. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. This woman had believed in him when he was at his lowest point, and now he was able to show her that her faith had not been misplaced. As they talked, Marcus learned that Mrs. Thompson had retired from teaching 3 years ago. She lived alone in a small apartment not far from the school where she had taught for over 30 years. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, and she had no children of her own. Teaching had been her life, and her students had been like her children. She told Marcus that she often thought about him and wondered how he was doing, hoping that he was happy and successful. Marcus felt a pang of guilt hearing this. He had been so caught up in his own life that he had not made time to visit the woman who had changed everything for him. He apologized to Mrs. Thompson for not staying in better touch, for not visiting more often, but she waved away his apology with a gentle smile, telling him that she understood. She said that young people are busy building their lives, and she was just grateful to know that he was doing well. One of the other teachers at the table, a kind-looking woman with curly gray hair, mentioned that Mrs. Thompson had been talking about this palace tour for months. She had been so excited about the opportunity to visit and see the historic building up close. Apparently, applying for the tour was very competitive, and Mrs. Thompson had been thrilled when she received her acceptance letter. The woman added with a knowing smile that this unexpected reunion with Marcus must have made the experience even more special. Mrs. Thompson nodded enthusiastically, saying that seeing Marcus here was the most wonderful surprise she could have imagined. She told him that this was now the best day she had experienced in years. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. This woman had given him so much, had literally saved his life, and all she wanted was to know that he was okay and successful. As they continued to talk, a palace staff member approached the table and politely informed the group that the tour would be concluding in about 20 minutes. The teachers would need to gather their belongings and make their way to the exit. Marcus felt panic rise in his chest. 20 minutes was not nearly enough time. He had so much more he wanted to say to Mrs. Thompson, so much more he wanted to share with her. Mrs. Thompson saw the distress on Marcus's face and patted his hand reassuringly. She told him not to worry, that this meeting was already more than she could have hoped for. She said she would treasure this memory forever, and that knowing he was happy in doing well was the greatest gift he could have given her. But Marcus shook his head. This was not enough. After everything Mrs. Thompson had done for him, after all the hours she had spent helping him and believing in him, he needed to do something more meaningful. An idea suddenly came to Marcus, and before he could second-guess himself, he excused himself from the table. He told Mrs. Thompson to wait there, that he would be right back. She looked confused, but nodded, watching as Marcus quickly left the reception hall. He walked rapidly through the palace corridors, his mind focused on his plan. He knew it was highly irregular and might even get him in trouble, but he did not care. Some things were more important than following every rule. Marcus made his way to the office of Captain Reynolds, the head of the Royal Guard. Captain Reynolds was a stern but fair man in his 50s who commanded respect from all the guards under his supervision. Marcus had always had a good relationship with the captain, who had recognized his dedication and work ethic from the beginning. But what Marcus was about to ask was unprecedented. He had no idea if the captain would agree. Marcus knocked on the captain's door and waited nervously. When he heard the captain's voice telling him to enter, he walked in and stood at attention. Captain Reynolds looked up from the paperwork on his desk, his eyebrows raised in surprise at seeing Marcus. He asked what he could do for him. Marcus took a deep breath before explaining the situation. He told Captain Reynolds about Mrs. Thompson, about how she had been his teacher and had changed his life when he was a troubled teenager. He explained that she was currently at the palace as part of the retired teachers' tour, and that they had just reunited after not seeing each other for a long time. Then Marcus made his request. He asked if there was any way Mrs. Thompson could be given a special private tour. Perhaps see parts of the palace that were not included in the regular tours. He wanted to give her an experience she would never forget. To show her in some small way how grateful he was for everything she had done for him, Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an unreadable expression. The silence stretched out, and Marcus began to worry that he had overstepped and would be reprimanded for his boldness. But then slowly, a small smile appeared on the captain's face. He told Marcus that he appreciated his honesty and his loyalty to someone who had helped him. The captain said that while this was an unusual request, he was willing to make an exception given the circumstances. Captain Reynolds picked up his phone and made a call. Marcus stood there, hardly daring to breathe, as the captain spoke quietly to someone on the other end. When he hung up, he looked at Marcus and told him that arrangements had been made. Mrs. Thompson would be allowed to stay. After the other tour guests departed, and Marcus would be permitted to give her a special tour of additional palace areas. However, the captain made it clear that this was a one-time exception, and that Marcus would need to remain completely professional throughout. Marcus thanked Captain Reynolds profusely, his voice thick with gratitude. The captain dismissed him with a nod, but there was a warmth in his eyes that Marcus had rarely seen before. As Marcus hurried back to the reception hall, he felt like his heart might burst with happiness. He was going to be able to give Mrs. Thompson an experience she would remember for the rest of her life, and that meant everything to him. When Marcus returned to the East Garden reception hall, the other teachers were already gathering their things and preparing to leave. Mrs. Thompson was standing with them, her small handbag clutched in her hands, looking sad that her wonderful day was coming to an end. Marcus approached her with a huge smile on his face and told her that she would not be leaving just yet. He explained that special arrangements had been made for her to have a private tour of some additional areas of the palace. She was interested. Mrs. Thompson's eyes went wide with shock and disbelief. She asked Marcus if he was serious, if this was really happening. When he nodded and assured her that it was all arranged, she put both hands over her heart and looked like she might cry again. The other teachers gathered around, expressing their excitement for Mrs. Thompson and telling her how lucky she was. They hugged her goodbye and wished her well, clearly delighted that their friend was getting such a special opportunity. After the main tour group departed, Marcus and Mrs. Thompson stood together in the now quiet reception hall. She looked at him with such gratitude and wonder that Marcus felt humbled. He offered her his arm, and she took it, leaning on him slightly as they began their private tour. He could feel how much this meant to her, and he was determined to make every moment special. Marcus led Mrs. Thompson through parts of the palace that most visitors never got to see. He showed her the historic portrait gallery, where paintings of kings and queens from centuries past hung in gilded frames. Mrs. Thompson, with her love of history, was absolutely fascinated. She stopped at each portrait, reading the small plaques that explained who the people were and when they had ruled. Marcus stood patiently beside her, answering her questions when he could, and simply enjoying watching her excitement. They walked through the palace library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with thousands of books. The smell of old leather and paper filled the air. An afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating patterns on the polished wooden floor. Mrs. Thompson gasped when she entered this room. As a former English teacher, she had always loved books, and being surrounded by such an impressive collection moved her deeply. She ran her fingers gently along the spines of ancient volumes, whispering about how beautiful it all was. Marcus told her stories about the palace that he had learned during his training. He explained the history of different rooms, pointed out architectural details, and shared interesting facts about the royal family. Mrs. Thompson listened to everything with the same attention she had always given to her students' words. Every so often, she would look at Marcus with such pride, shaking her head as if she still could not believe that her former troubled student was now her knowledgeable guide through the royal palace. As they walked through the state dining room, with its enormous crystal chandelier and long table that could seat 50 people, Mrs. Thompson grew quiet. She looked around at the grandeur surrounding them, and then she turned to Marcus with tears in her eyes. She told him that she needed to say something important. Marcus stopped walking and gave her his full attention. Concerned by the emotion in her voice, Mrs. Thompson began to speak, her voice shaking slightly. She told Marcus that in all her years of teaching, she had worked with hundreds of students. Some had been easy to reach, naturally bright and motivated. Others had been more challenging, requiring extra patience and effort. But Marcus, she said, had been different. When she first met him, she saw a boy who was angry at the world, who felt like life had been unfair to him, who was on a dangerous path that would lead nowhere good. She explained that she had seen something in his eyes, though, a spark of intelligence and goodness that was being buried under all that anger and pain. She told Marcus that she had decided right then that she would not give up on him, no matter how difficult he made it. There were many times when he had tested her patience, when he had been rude or ungrateful, when other teachers told her she was wasting her time, but she never stopped believing that he could become something special. Mrs. Thompson's voice broke as she continued. She said that there had been moments over the years when she wondered if she had really made a difference in any of her students' lives. Teaching was often a thankless job, with long hours and little recognition. She had spent countless evenings grading papers and preparing lessons, sacrificing time with her own family to help other people's children. Sometimes she questioned whether any of it mattered, whether she had truly impacted anyone. But seeing Marcus now, she said with tears streaming down her face, seeing the man he had become, the respect he had earned, and the pride he took in his work, it made everything worthwhile. She told him that he had no idea what this meant to her, to see concrete proof that her efforts had mattered, that she had helped change someone's life for the better. Marcus represented every reason she had become a teacher in the first place. She thanked him for giving her this gift. Marcus could not hold back his own tears any longer. He wrapped his arms around Mrs. Thompson and held her while they both cried. He told her that she had not just changed his life, she had saved it. Without her intervention, her patience, and her unwavering belief in him, he honestly did not know where he would be today. Probably in jail or dead, he said bluntly. She had seen value in him when he could not see it in himself, and she had refused to let him throw his life away. They stood there in the grand state dining room, teacher and former student, holding each other and crying tears of joy and gratitude. It was a moment of pure human connection, of love and appreciation that transcended their different ages and backgrounds. In that magnificent room where world leaders and dignitaries dined, where important decisions affecting millions of people were discussed, the most important thing happening was this simple expression of thanks between two people whose lives had become forever intertwined. After they composed themselves, Marcus and Mrs. Thompson continued their tour. The emotional moment they had just shared seemed to deepen their connection even further. They talked more openly now, with Marcus sharing details about his life that he had never told anyone else. He spoke about the challenges of Royal Guard training, the loneliness he sometimes felt, being so far from his family, and the immense pressure of his responsibilities. Mrs. Thompson listened with the same compassionate attention she had always shown. Offering words of wisdom and encouragement when appropriate, Marcus led her to the palace gardens, which were in full bloom with flowers of every color imaginable. The gardens stretched out over several acres, with winding paths, decorative fountains, and carefully manicured hedges shaped into elaborate designs. Mrs. Thompson moved slowly along the paths, stopping frequently to admire different flowers and breathe in their fragrances. She mentioned that she had always loved gardens but could not maintain one in her small apartment. This was like stepping into paradise for her. They sat together on a stone bench near a fountain, watching the water sparkle in the afternoon sunlight. Mrs. Thompson asked Marcus about his family, about whether his parents knew what he had achieved. Marcus told her that they did, and that they were very proud of him, though they still worried about him constantly. His mother called him every week to make sure he was eating properly and staying safe. Mrs. Thompson laughed at this, saying that mothers never stop worrying about their children no matter how old they get. Then Marcus asked Mrs. Thompson about her life since retirement. She told him honestly that it had been difficult adjusting to not working. For so many years, teaching had been her entire identity, her purpose. Waking up without students to prepare for, without lessons to plan, had left her feeling lost and unnecessary. She had tried to fill her time with hobbies and volunteer work, but nothing quite replaced the fulfillment she had felt in the classroom. Marcus listened thoughtfully, noticing the sadness in her voice. He realized that while he had been worried about not visiting her enough, Thompson had been dealing with her own struggles of loneliness and purpose. It made him even more grateful that circumstances had brought them together today. They both needed this reunion, though perhaps for different reasons. As they continued talking, a palace staff member approached them respectfully. She was a young woman in a neat uniform, who apologized for the interruption. She explained that she had been instructed to inform them that the royal family had heard about the special tours taking place, and had made an unexpected request. The Queen herself wanted to meet Mrs. Thompson. If she was willing, both Marcus and Mrs. Thompson stared at the staff member in complete shock. Marcus asked her to repeat what she had just said, certain he must have misheard. But the young woman confirmed it. The Queen had been told about Marcus's former teacher visiting the palace, and about the impact she had made on his life. The Queen wanted to personally thank Mrs. Thompson for her service to education and her dedication to helping troubled students. Mrs. Thompson looked like she might faint. She grabbed Marcus's arm for support, her face pale with disbelief. She asked if this was some kind of joke, but Marcus assured her it was real. He was just as surprised as she was. Meeting the Queen was an incredible honor, something most people could only dream about. The fact that the Queen was taking time from her busy schedule to meet a retired teacher showed remarkable kindness and respect. The staff member led them back into the palace and through a series of corridors to a private sitting room. Marcus's heart was pounding, and he kept glancing at Mrs. Thompson to make sure she was okay. She walked in a daze, her hand gripping his arm tightly. When they reached the sitting room, they were asked to wait for a few moments while the final arrangements were. Mad Mrs. Thompson used this time to try to compose herself. She checked her appearance in a mirror, smoothing her white hair and adjusting her glasses with trembling hands. She whispered to Marcus that she looked terrible, that she was not dressed appropriately for meeting royalty. Marcus assured her that she looked perfect, that the Queen would see her for who she truly was, a wonderful person who had dedicated her life to helping others. When the door finally opened and the Queen entered, both Marcus and Mrs. Thompson immediately bowed as protocol required. The Queen was a gracious woman in her 60s, wearing an elegant dress and her signature pearls. She had a warm smile and kind eyes that immediately put people at ease. She walked directly to Mrs. Thompson and extended her hand. Greeting her warmly and thanking her for coming to the palace, the Queen invited them to sit down. And for the next 30 minutes, they had an extraordinary conversation. The Queen asked Mrs. Thompson about her teaching career, about the challenges she had faced and the rewards she had experienced. Mrs. Thompson, after her initial nervousness wore off, spoke passionately about education and the importance of believing in every student's potential. The Queen listened with genuine interest, nodding along and asking thoughtful questions. Then the Queen turned her attention to Marcus. She told him that Captain Reynolds had informed her about his request to give his former teacher a special tour. The Queen said she was impressed by Marcus's loyalty and gratitude, qualities that reflected well on his character and on his suitability as a royal guard. She mentioned that too often in modern society, people forgot to honor those who had helped them along their journey. Marcus's gesture toward Mrs. Thompson was a beautiful reminder of the lasting impact teachers could have. The Queen then said something that made both Marcus and Mrs. Thompson tear up once again. She explained that she personally funded several educational programs aimed at helping at-risk students, inspired by her own experiences with teachers who had made a difference in her life. She told Mrs. Thompson that teachers like her were heroes who rarely received the recognition they deserved. The Queen said that she wanted to do something to honor Mrs. Thompson's service and dedication. From her desk, the Queen retrieved a beautiful medal on a ribbon. She explained that this was a special commendation for extraordinary service to education, rarely given and highly prestigious. The Queen stood and formally presented the medal to Mrs. Thompson, thanking her on behalf of the country for her decades of commitment to shaping young minds and changing lives. Mrs. Thompson accepted the medal with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face, completely overwhelmed by the honor. The meeting with the Queen lasted a bit longer as they continued their conversation. The Queen asked Mrs. Thompson if she had any advice for current teachers working with difficult students. Mrs. Thompson thought for a moment and then shared her philosophy. She said that every child, no matter how troubled or challenging, has goodness inside them. Sometimes that goodness is buried under pain, anger, or fear, but it is always there. A teacher's job is not just to impart knowledge, but to help students discover their own worth and potential. She emphasized that it requires patience, compassion, and an unwavering belief that every student deserves a chance to succeed. The Queen nodded thoughtfully at these words and thanked Mrs. Thompson for her wisdom. She told her that she would share these thoughts with the educational programs she supported. Before they left, the Queen asked if she could take a photograph with Mrs. Thompson and Marcus together. A palace photographer was called in, and several pictures were taken of the three of them. The Queen made sure to get copies for Mrs. Thompson to take home, saying she should have proof of this extraordinary day. As they said their goodbyes, the Queen did something unexpected. She gave Mrs. Thompson a warm hug, thanking her again for everything she had done for students like Marcus. It was a deeply human moment that transcended royal protocol and showed the Queen's genuine appreciation. Mrs. Thompson was so moved that she could barely speak, managing only to thank the Queen repeatedly through her tears. After leaving the sitting room, Marcus and Mrs. Thompson walked slowly back through the palace corridors. They were both quiet, processing the incredible events of the past few hours. What had started as a routine palace tour for retired teachers had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined. Mrs. Thompson kept looking at the medal in her hands, touching it gently as if to confirm it was real. When they finally reached the palace exit, Marcus realized their time together was coming to an end. He did not want to say goodbye, did not want this perfect day to end. He asked Mrs. Thompson if he could call her a car to take her home, but she said she preferred to take the bus as she normally did. However, Marcus insisted, and she eventually agreed. Too tired and emotional to argue, while they waited for the car to arrive, they sat together on a bench near the palace gates. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over everything. Marcus told Mrs. Thompson that he was sorry for not staying in better touch over the past year, and he promised that would change. He said he would visit her regularly from now on, that she was too important to him to let life's busyness get in the way of their relationship. Mrs. Thompson squeezed his hand and told him not to feel guilty. She understood that he had his own life to live, his own responsibilities and dreams to pursue. What mattered most to her was knowing that he was happy and successful, and today had given her more than she could have ever hoped for. She said that even if they never saw each other again, she would carry this day in her heart forever. But Marcus shook his head firmly. He told her that she was wrong, that they would definitely see each other again, and often. He explained that she was like family to him, more than just a former teacher. She had been there for him during the darkest period of his life, and he wanted to be there for her now. He asked if she would allow him to visit her regularly, to maybe take her out for dinners, or help her with anything she needed. Mrs. Thompson's eyes filled with tears once more, and she said yes, that she would love that very much. When the car arrived, Marcus helped Mrs. Thompson into the back seat, making sure she was comfortable. He gave the driver her address and asked him to take good care of her. Before closing the door, Mrs. Thompson looked up at Marcus one last time. She told him that she loved him like a son, that watching him grow into the man he had become was one of the greatest joys of her life. Marcus leaned down and kissed her forehead, telling her he loved her too and would call her tomorrow as the car pulled away. Marcus stood watching until it disappeared from sight. He felt a complex mixture of emotions, happiness, gratitude, sadness, and love, all swirling together inside him. This day had reminded him of what truly mattered in life. Not the uniform he wore or the prestigious position he held, but the connections he made with people who genuinely cared about him. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the palace. Other guards asked Marcus about the special tours and meeting with the Queen. Captain Reynolds called him into his office again, but this time it was to congratulate him. The captain told Marcus that the Queen had been very impressed with him and had specifically mentioned how his actions reflected the kind of character and values the Royal Guard represented. Marcus thanked the captain, but in his heart he knew that any goodness in him existed because of people like Mrs. Thompson, who had believed in him. Over the following weeks, Marcus kept his promise. He visited Mrs. Thompson every week, bringing groceries and spending hours talking with her. He helped her with repairs around her apartment and took her out to restaurants she had always wanted to try. Their relationship deepened beyond teacher and student into something more like family. Marcus introduced Mrs. Thompson to his parents, and they were grateful to finally meet the woman who had saved their son. Mrs. Thompson framed the photograph of herself, Marcus and the Queen, hanging it in a prominent place in her living room. She also framed the medal she had received, though she insisted the real treasure was not the medal itself, but what it represented, confirmation that her life's work had mattered. She told everyone who visited about her amazing day at the palace, and the story spread throughout the retired teachers community, bringing joy and inspiration to many. The story also reached back to Mrs. Thompson's old school. The current principal invited her to come speak to the staff about her experience and her teaching philosophy. Standing in front of her former colleagues, Mrs. Thompson shared the story of Marcus and emphasized the importance of never giving up on any student. She challenged the teachers to look for the Marcus in their own classrooms, the troubled child who just needed someone to believe in them. Her speech was so moving that several teachers were crying by the end, recommitting themselves to their calling. For Marcus, that day at the palace became a turning point in his life. It reminded him to stay connected to his roots, to never forget where he came from or who had helped him along the way. He became known among the royal guard for his kindness and willingness to help others, qualities he had learned from Mrs. Thompson. Several younger guards began coming to him for advice and mentorship, and Marcus found himself passing on the same lessons of patience, belief, and compassion that had been given to him. Years later, when Marcus was eventually promoted to a leadership position within the Royal Guard, he requested permission to create a mentorship program. The program connected guards with at-risk youth from difficult backgrounds, giving these young people positive role models and opportunities they might not otherwise have. Marcus personally oversaw the program, and Mrs. Thompson became one of its advisors. Sharing her decades of wisdom about working with troubled children, the program was hugely successful, helping dozens of young people turn their lives around just as Marcus had done. At the program's annual ceremony, Marcus always made sure Mrs. Thompson had a seat of honor. He would publicly thank her for inspiring not just him, but an entire initiative that was changing lives. Mrs. Thompson would sit there with tears in her eyes, proud beyond words of what her former student had accomplished. The bond between Marcus and Mrs. Thompson remained strong for the rest of her life. Even as she grew older and more frail, Marcus never stopped visiting, never stopped showing his gratitude and love. When Mrs. Thompson eventually passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 82, Marcus was devastated but also grateful. Grateful that he had taken the time to rebuild their relationship. Grateful for that magical day at the palace that had brought them back together. And grateful that he had told her many times how much she meant to him at her funeral. Marcus stood in his full Royal Guard uniform and delivered the eulogy. He spoke about the extraordinary woman who had seen potential in a troubled teenager when no one else would. He talked about her patience, her wisdom, and her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. He told the gathered mourners that Mrs. Thompson had taught him the most important lesson of all, that one person who refuses to give up on you can change the entire trajectory of your life. Through his tears, Marcus said that he hoped to honor her memory by being that person for others. By passing on the gift she had given him, the story of Marcus and Mrs. Thompson became something of a legend. Within the palace and beyond, it was a reminder that true greatness is not always found in grand gestures or prestigious positions, but in the quiet dedication of people like Mrs. Thompson, who spend their lives helping others without expecting recognition or reward. It showed that kindness and belief in others can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see or imagine. And it proved that gratitude and love, when expressed openly and honestly, have the power to touch hearts and change lives in ways that endure forever.